Joining us now is our chief Washington correspondent, Mr. Jonathan Karl. If news gets broken about the Trump administration, this is the guy to blame. He's been dropping headlines for weeks from his new book, Betrayal, The Final Act of the Trump Show, diving into the final year of the Trump presidency and its aftermath. John, great to have you here on the show.
Thank you, Lindsay. Great to be here.
I want to take a step back and ask you, as someone who's covered Donald Trump for years, what was the most surprising thing you learned in your reporting for this book about the former president and his actions in the run-up to January 6th and the days after?
The most surprising thing was how close we came to a much greater crisis. I mean, I knew it was bad. You and I covered the day-to-day of the election and the aftermath and January 6th itself. But when I looked back and really tried to reconstruct every single day as a part of the initial reporting for this, and to go back and to see what I didn't know at the time, to see what was happening behind the scenes, it became obvious to me that there were many instances where things actually could have gone off the rails in a far more dramatic and profound way than they actually did.
I'd like to pull up a quote from your book where you write about January 6th, and you say, there are also those who say the violence that day has been exaggerated, that there was no real threat to our democracy, that it was just a protest that got a little out of hand. That's a lie. January 6th was an attempt to overturn a presidential election. It was an assault on democracy itself. We've seen in the months since that day this attempt to whitewash what happened and to continue to lie about the 2020 election. And I want to ask, has it worked? I mean, because we see poll after poll of Republican voters who today say that they believe the 2020 election was stolen.
Unfortunately, in part, it has worked. But I think that I'm so glad that you pulled out that quote. This was an assault on democracy itself, because even those who acknowledge that it was a terrible thing, that rioters went in and assaulted police officers, committed vandalism in the Capitol building, broke in where they shouldn't have been, you know, that is not all it was. That's terrible. Even if it's just what you're showing in those pictures there, that's terrible. But what made this so profoundly awful is the purpose behind it. It was not simply an effort to rampage and pillage and to express, you know, some kind of a violent protest. This was an effort to stop the movement of American democracy, to stop what is the essence of American democracy, which is a peaceful transition of power. And, you know, unfortunately, there is a wide segment of the population that not only looks back at that day and remembers something different than what actually happened, but believes the lies that have been repeated so often about the election being stolen. And I tried to, in this book, go in and address the reasons behind that disbelief, the reasons that so many people have come to question whether or not the election was really free and fair. And I think it's important that we do that. We don't just say, look, there's no evidence, it's all a big lie, big lie, big lie. We have to go through and explain why the allegations that have been repeated so often by Donald Trump and people around him are simply not true.
And you write about how in your conversations with him for this book, the former president actually seems to look back fondly on January 6th. How would you describe his demeanor and frankly, his mental state as you pressed him on that day? And what was your reaction as you heard his justifications and explanations?
It's really quite striking. I tried to describe the entire scene, not just the words he said, but the environment. I mean, he brings me down to Mar-a-Lago, and I had never been to Mar-a-Lago before. It's a beautiful place. We were sitting down in the middle of this ornate lobby with towering ceilings. And he has the interview conducted right in the middle of that lobby before dinner so that people can see him being interviewed as they come into dinner and to happy hour out on the patio outside. And, you know, he was very gracious. He offered me, as he always does, he orders a Diet Coke. He offers me one. You know, he makes some remarks about my previous book. And, you know, but he seemed to be in a actually quite a good mood. And he seemed to have lost weight since he left the White House, all of that. And then, as I'm asking him about this day that I remember as one of the worst days that I've ever witnessed in my lifetime, he is talking about it as one of the best days of his presidency, and it's not something I really anticipated. We've heard him do it now in a few other venues, but he's saying it, he seems rational, totally rational. He seems friendly. He's enjoying describing this horrific day as one of the finest days of his presidency. But the lack of any sense that there was something wrong, I think, is delusional. There's no other way to say it. It's not that he seemed like he was out of his mind and he was ranting and raving. He actually seemed quite normal while he was saying this. Listen to the tape. That's why I wanted to put the tapes out there. Because he's talking about Mike Pence and the people saying, hang Mike Pence, the people calling for the execution of his vice president. And he's justifying their actions, but he's doing it in a very almost matter-of-fact way. It was bizarre.
And while you say that he seemed quite normal, the former president's mental state was something that you write about surrounding conversations on invoking the 25th Amendment by the cabinet after January 6th. What did you learn there on how members of his own administration viewed him and what they were considering doing?
We had heard at the time, and I had reported on ABC that night that there were discussions, but, you know, frankly, we didn't have the details about what those discussions were, so I spent a lot of time trying to go back and finding out what was going on. And the most surprising thing to me was that two of his most prominent cabinet members were part of those discussions. Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, who had known Trump for years before he took that job, and Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State. And they had discussions that night. Neither one of them talked to Trump. Neither one of them thought to reach out to Trump. Neither one of them tried to reach out to Trump to tell him to get out and call the riots off. Pompeo was actually in Washington at the time. Mnuchin was traveling in the Middle East. But they were discussing this and with other cabinet members, and I learned that Pompeo had actually requested a legal analysis of it to be done. But it quickly became moot because two cabinet members who they would need as votes to declare him mentally incompetent resigned the very next day, Betsy DeVos and Elaine Chao. So it became moot. There were also questions about whether or not it would face legal challenge. It almost certainly would. It probably wouldn't have been able to get him out of office timely enough. And now, you know, they all pretend like it didn't happen, that they never challenged, they never questioned his mental fitness, but they did. Trust me, they did.
And you write also about a conversation that you had with House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy days before January 6th, where you asked him if he would stand up to Trump's lies about the election, and he essentially told you it wasn't worth it politically. Since then, we've certainly seen some Republicans try to keep Trump at an arm's length, but much of the party is still embracing him. Do you see anything that might change that?
I do. I think that Trump's relentless focus on the past it spooks Republican leaders. I think if you got McCarthy in, you gave him some truth serum and forced him to answer the questions, that he would express real concerns about what Trump's behavior might mean to his efforts to regain Congress next year. All things look good for Republicans politically. They won in Virginia. They got a lot closer to winning in New Jersey in those two off-year elections. But they did it with candidates that either ignored Trump, stood away from Trump, or actually said that they were opposed to Trump in the case of Chitterelli in New Jersey. But, you know, he's got a tremendous hold on the party because he still does have a very high level of support on rank-and-file Republican voters, and that's why somebody like Kevin McCarthy feels that he cannot come out and directly stand in opposition to Trump.
And considering that, I mean, you've reported here before how most people around Trump believe that he will try to run again in 2024. But you've said that ultimately you don't believe that he will. Why is that, given the hold that he still clearly has on so many party members as well as Republican supporters?
Before I answer that, let me say a caveat. He may well run. So this is not a hard and fast prediction. I just think it is more likely that he does not run than he would run. And I think it's because he does not want to face the possibility of losing again. And, you know, Trump is not a dumb man. He can look at facts. He can ignore those facts, as he often does, and he can say things that are not true. But he knows that there is a real possibility. I would say a very, very high possibility. There is like no way he could get elected again because he has done so much to alienate everybody but that core base Republicans, especially after January 6th. So I don't think he wants to face the prospect of losing. And also, you know, look at some of the tea leaves out there. All he talks about is the past. He doesn't talk about the future. He's entirely focused on 2020. And what did he just do? His company, they're selling the Trump International Hotel in Washington. Trump loved having that hotel just down the road from the White House, and did events there frequently and used it frequently. Now he's selling it. Doesn't sound like a guy to me that has his eyes on coming back to Washington. But that said, he certainly wants us, Lindsay, to believe he's running again, because that's the key to his relevance. I believe he won't run, but I also believe that he won't actually let us know that he is not running until the very last minute.
We shall see. All right, Jonathan Karl, Betrayal, the final act of the Trump show, is available for purchase wherever books are sold. Thanks so much for your time, John.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.